Good morning. Be studying again this morning in the book of John, chapter 1. And pick up at verse 43 from last Sunday. John 1:43. As we were looking last week, we saw John and two of his disciples that were standing together. John pointed them to Jesus, and they followed him. One of those were Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, and he went and found Peter and told him that they had found the Messiah. And as we come down today into verse 43, it says, the following day Jesus would go forth unto Galilee, and findeth Philip, and said unto him, Follow me. Now Philip was of Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip findeth Nathanael, and said unto him, We have found him of whom Moses in the law and the prophets did write, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And Nathanael said unto him, Can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? Philip said unto him, Come and see. Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him, and saith of him, Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile. Nathanael said unto him, Whence knowest thou me? Jesus answered and said unto him, Before that Philip called thee, when thou wast under the fig tree, I saw thee. Nathanael answered and said unto him, Rabbi, thou art the Son of God. Thou art the King of Israel. Jesus answered and said unto him, Because I said unto thee, I saw thee under the fig tree, believest thou? Thou shalt see greater things than these. And he said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter you shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. As we are looking at these verses, we continue in that thought or that idea that these disciples, who Jesus later would refer to as apostles, were not people who just accidentally came to know him or haphazardly were invited by him to come and follow and see the work which he had prepared. And so here in these verses, we see John showing us that Jesus bringing these disciples together that we call apostles took place in a fairly rapid kind of way when Jesus began to start his ministry, because in these things we see that John points two of his disciples to Jesus. One of them was Andrew, who was Simon Peter's brother. And then the next day he goes looking for Philip, and Philip is the brother of Nathanael. And so within a process of just a couple of days, we've got Peter and Andrew, we've got Philip and Nathanael, and before long we'll be working into James and John and the rest of them. And as we're looking at all of this, we see that it's happening at a fairly decent pace, because John definitely tells us the next day, the next day, the next day. And even down into the second chapter, it tells us, and the third day, there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee. So Jesus was intending to go back to the area of Cana of Galilee. There was a wedding which was taking place, and he intended to be there. He had been invited, and he also, we see, it's interesting, verse 2, and both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And so they meet Jesus. John starts pointing them towards Jesus, and in just a matter of days, they're now referred to as Jesus' disciples. They're no longer John's disciples in the general sense. I mean, yes, they're still aware of what John taught, and they were brought to a knowledge because of John the Baptist. But as John said, and will say, Jesus will increase and he will decrease. People will flock to Jesus more so than even they had of John. And so here in 43, Jesus is preparing to go back to Cana in Galilee, and he would go there. But the interesting thing is, he findeth Philip and said unto him, Follow me. Now we know that there were two disciples of John who were with him when Jesus was pointed out, and we know one of them was Andrew, which was Simon Peter's brother. And then Jesus here in the next day says that John says that he wants to go and find Philip. So the question that comes up would be, was Philip the other disciple who was with John? Now, there has been lots of disagreements and discussions as to who the second disciple was. Some commentaries say that it may very well have been John, who was the brother of James, who was the author of this particular book. But I find it interesting in why Jesus all of a sudden was looking for Philip. He wanted to find him. That's an interesting way of determining or making a statement. He was purposely looking for him. And there could be lots of reasons, I suppose, why he was specifically looking for him. But to me, in this the way this story goes, or the account historically that John is giving us, we have Andrew, and he goes and finds Simon Peter. And so those two become disciples of Jesus. And then the next day, Jesus starts looking. He wants to go and find Philip, and he encourages him to follow him. And so, and I'm just going to say, from my perspective in reading this, I feel that, Philip was probably the second disciple there because Jesus is looking for him also. And so if there was another one, which could have been John, as some say, I'm not going to argue the point that far, but it doesn't say he went looking for John the next day. It says he went looking for Philip the next day. And so he's looking for Philip, and he also knows in looking for Philip that he is also looking for Nathanael, because Jesus speaks here some of his miraculous insight and ability to see and to comprehend and to know things beyond the normal human level, as we see down through here. And so the next day he finds Philip, which was the same city of Andrew and Peter. Now that to me is interesting once again, because these two disciples were with John. And so if Andrew and Peter and Philip and Nathanael and all of those were of the same city or of the same town, and they're there, it to me continues that idea that, it was probably Philip that was with Andrew, because they were the same city, the same town. And it wasn't Nathanael that Jesus went looking for directly, but he was looking for Philip. And so he finds Philip because he was of the same city of Andrew and Peter. Philip then says, findeth Nathanael, and said unto him, We have found him of whom Moses in the law and the prophets did write, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And so we have this, it's an interesting thing to me is people want their family involved in these things. This is an exciting time. Andrew wants Simon, his brother, to know about what's going on. Jesus finds Philip, and Philip wants to find Nathanael, and people began because John the Baptist had prepared them. John the Baptist had prepared the way, and we see the wisdom of God. These individuals had already had, if you want to call it that, the well primed. You know, it was ready to go. They just needed someone to grab onto it and take off, and that would be Jesus. And so Jesus comes along. John points them in the direction of Jesus. This is the one whom I've been talking about. This is the one. And so they begin to follow him, to see him, to know him. And so we have Andrew and Peter, and now we have Philip and Nathanael, and somewhere along the way we're going to end up with James and John. And so these 6 individuals that we're going to come to see are going to be close associates one of another. So the first, these first 6, and I know it hasn't mentioned James and John yet, but these 6 individuals were more closely perhaps known to one another than some of the others along the way, such as Levi and Judas Iscariot and some of those disciples that came from a more diverse background. But perhaps as many as 6 of them were very close, perhaps even before they became disciples of Jesus. Now, Philip goes and finds Nathanael. It's interesting. Jesus tells Philip, "Come follow me." And Philip's like, "Well, yes, but wait a minute, I need to go find my brother." And so he didn't just jump in and follow Jesus without saying, I need to find my brother. Jesus found Philip. Philip found Nathanael. He tells Nathanael that we have found him of whom Moses in the law and prophets did write. So was he with Andrew there the other day when they were following Jesus and went to where he was and saw where he lived and stayed with him that evening? My answer is yes. And in having talked with Jesus and been with Jesus, and now Jesus is inviting him to become a part of the ministry, becoming a part of what will be an apostleship. He wants his brother to come, and he says, we found him, the one that was mentioned, and John had spiked this up. John had kind of revived that idea. It wasn't that it was completely dead or dormant, but with John's preaching that the kingdom of heaven was at hand and all that was going on there and calling people to repentance and talking about preparing, everything was notched up. Everyone was kind of sitting on the edge of their seat, waiting to see what was going to happen. And so he tells his brother that we have found him of whom Moses in the law and the prophets did write. There are, so far as has been determined, there's a little over 300, and it varies from person to person, but we know that there's at least over 300 prophecies in the Old Testament that speaks to one extent or the other about Jesus and his ministry and all that was associated with it. And part of John's ministry was perhaps to reignite some of those prophecies and let the people know about what was going on, because he here says that he knows about this individual who Moses in the law wrote about and the prophets did write about. They have found him. They see him as the fulfillment of that. Now, I'm going to jump just a minute, but when we get over into the book of Acts, the 4th chapter, some of the scribes and the leaders of the people refer to Peter and some of those who were with him, the disciples, as being ignorant and unlearned men. And some people have misapplied that, believing that these people were just fishermen or tax collectors, and they weren't very smart people. That's the way many people tend to interpret that. Matter of fact, one of the newer translations not only goes that far, but it goes on to say that they were ignorant and illiterate men. Illiterate implies that they didn't even have the ability to read, write, to understand, comprehend much more than what they were told. But their understanding of Jesus, to me, in looking at these verses, was much more in depth than a lot of people give them credit for. They were aware of what Moses had talked about, what the prophets had talked about, what was in the law, what was in the prophets. I'm not sure that they knew all 300 and some points of reference, but they knew that this man to them and to John was a fulfillment of those prophecies. And so he refers to him as Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And so he identifies in much the way that they would have at that time. First names, last names kind of weren't the style in that day, and so people were generally known either for where they lived, thus Jesus of Nazareth. There were probably many people who had the name Jesus, which it is the Old Testament name Joshua, and so we have a lot of Joshuas and Calebs and all of those who named their sons after Old Testament individuals. And so Joshua is one of those Old Testament figures that a lot of people were interested in. The name means Jesus saves. And so the Old Testament name Joshua is the New Testament name Jesus. And so we have found Joshua or Jesus, and rather than say, well, which one? That's like John Smith. Which John Smith? And so we have found him, and so he says Jesus of Nazareth, and so that helps to define a little bit closer which Jesus, which Joshua that they are in reference to. And so to go just a little bit further, and we don't always see it this way, it's interesting. Earlier, Jesus referred to Simon as the son of Jonah. In other places, it refers to him, the more familiar term is Simon Bar-Jonah. And so many times to determine which Simon we're talking about, because there was more than one Simon in the scriptures. But we have Simon, son of Jonah. And so here we have Jesus, or Yeshua, who is the son of Joseph, or Jesus Bar-Joseph would be the way in which it would be written out if we thought of it in that sense. Bar meaning, B-A-R means the son of. And so they tell him that we found the Messiah. He is Jesus from Nazareth, and he is the son of Joseph. And of course, yes?
They could use Joseph the carpenter.
In other places, they refer to Jesus as the carpenter's son, or the son of the carpenter. So Jesus, the carpenter's son, was one way of identifying. A lot of last names that some people carry with them comes from the trade of their fathers. As we come into surnames, along the way, some may refer to him as Joseph Carpenter and Jesus Carpenter. That word carpenter, last name, is many times comes from those who were skilled in carpentry. Thatcher, as a last name, comes from people who originally were roofers. They did the thatched roofs. They were thatchers, and so the last name would be Thatcher. And Cooper, Cooper is one who makes barrels. They were skilled in blacksmithing, also made barrels. And so the barrel maker, John the barrel maker, is John Cooper. That's the way it kind of worked out. And so, there's lots of ways of identifying, but once that came into being. We pick up surnames and all that, and what once was a skill or a skill or a trade that identified someone ultimately became their family name, or the way in which they were first and last names were established. Now, it's interesting, Nathanael's remarks. Now, his brother is all excited. Philip comes, he's all excited. You got to come and see. We found him. We found the Messiah, the one who was spoken of in the law of Moses and in the prophets and all those things. And then he says, Jesus of Nazareth, who is, the son of Joseph. And Nathanael is not as excited as his brother. He makes this passing statement: can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? That tells me a lot, both about Jesus' hometown and what people thought about it, and their attitude toward the people of Nazareth in general. Because Philip's all excited, and you can almost see Nathanael shaking his head. Brother, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Are you sure? I've never heard of anything worthwhile. That's kind of the impression that you get. Now, if you're telling me he came from Jerusalem or he came from this place or that place, that we might get more excited. John the Baptist was a priest. We know he was a Levite, and he was a priestly order. And so to look at John was a priest, and so you have that. But Nathanael just kind of says, I don't know. I'm not sold on the idea. And so he makes this statement, and he's straightforward with it. But Philip says, come and see. Now, Nathanael is an example of someone who works on the theory of what they've heard, what they perhaps know about the city. And in this sense, Jesus gets kind of grouped with all the others. Has there ever been a prophet come out of Nazareth? Has there ever been, an amazing thing happen from there? And he's just straightforward with that comment. If I was looking for the Messiah, I wouldn't be looking for him there. That's kind of what Nathanael is saying. But his brother, on the other hand, says that maybe you ought to just come and take a look for yourself. Rather than just judging him as where he was born or where he grew up. We're talking on the way up, some of the drug companies, you've probably heard a term that the drug companies called the West Virginians. It came up in the trial. We were called pillbillies. That was their favorite term for us, not hillbillies, but pillbillies with a P, for all the drugs and pills and things that we were basically pillheads. And so if you're thinking about that kind of reputation, and someone would say, I've been watching the news and I see about all these pillheads in West Virginia, could there anything good come out of West Virginia? And, it's one of those things where people would say, well, that's the reputation. But then again, you can't judge every person by where they are born or where they grow up. So Philip is more open to the sense of saying, come and see. And, Nathanael doesn't say, I already know he's nobody I want to see. So Nathanael does, at least because of his brother's encouragement, do just that, to come and see. And Jesus, who we find throughout the scriptures, knows the heart and the minds of individuals. And he has more than just a natural sense to him as being God in the flesh. It says that Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him. Now he was coming, and Philip said, "Come and see." So we know that Philip was probably the one who was bringing him there. But as Jesus sees him coming with Philip, Jesus makes a comment to him. He says, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile." That is one who practices some type of deceit, subtlety, craftiness. He's a man who, he could have, when Philip said, "We found the Messiah, come and see," even though Philip told him that, and maybe sometimes even though Nathanael may have thought there's no way anything good could come out of Nazareth, some people would not be quite as straightforward with their feelings, and they would say, "Oh, that's great. Oh, that's wonderful. Let's go see," even though in his heart he's saying, "I don't think this is going to pan out." So you say one thing and you do something else, but in Jesus' view of him, he's a man who speaks, what he thinks, and he lets you know how you stand. He doesn't try to cover things up or to speak good to you to your face and then say something else to your back. And so it's interesting. Sometimes, like many others, we maybe give Nathanael a bad rap because of what he says, but Jesus really says, he's a good, honest man, even though he says what he said, and he's aware of that, and he believes that. He says that. Some of us probably had, especially grandparents. It's kind of changed a lot, but I had one grandmother that she pretty much told you the way it was. I mean, she didn't candy coat anything. And so don't ask grandma about anything that you think she's going to try to just side with you because she's your grandma. My grandmother Essie would. She would tell you exactly the way it was, and if you didn't ask, she'd probably tell you anyway. And so, you couldn't say that she was two-faced because you always knew where you stood with her because she'd tell you. She'd tell you if your hair was too long, if you tuck your shirt in. I mean, it's just anything and everything. If something wasn't right, you knew that. And so, while on the surface Nathanael may seem a strange individual and may be a somewhat reluctant individual, he does seem to be an honest person because he didn't try to candy coat the whole thing. And so he has his view, he has his opinion of what the people of Nazareth are like based on perhaps what he's heard, maybe some people that he's even interacted with before. You remember, these people are not they're down in the area, it appears, of where John was baptizing on the east side of the Jordan. And so they're considerable ways from the area of Galilee. And so they are from that same kind of area and know the area. They may not spend a great deal of time there. So, Jesus makes this statement. Nathanael's coming to him. It's almost like before they're ever introduced. Today, normally, if I was Philip and bringing my brother, and we saw Jesus, I would say, Jesus, Messiah, whatever term they were using, Master, this is my brother Nathanael. Nathanael, this is Jesus of Nazareth. You'd go through those introductory kind of things. But before Nathanael even gets into that introductory kind of process, Jesus sees him coming, no doubt with Philip. And so as he's coming towards him, Jesus says, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile." And so he makes that statement about Nathanael. And it kind of knocks him off his pace somewhat, because Nathanael has his image in his mind maybe of what Jesus is like, what he expects. And so he's coming, and before he can say anything, Jesus says, "Ah, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile." And it knocks him off his pace, as I said, because Nathanael said unto him, "Whence knowest thou me?" Where do you know me from? I don't know you. How do you know me enough to know that, I'm an Israelite in whom is no guile? And where have we met before? I surely would remember, if somebody introduced us before, I would know that. And so how do you know about me? Where did you get, that concept? And it may have been an embarrassing moment because, he may have looked over at his brother and ready to punch him right in the side of the head. I'm just saying that. You know how family is. Did you tell him that? Did you tell him what I said about him? And so he wants to know, and so I can kind of see him looking sideways at his brother and looking at Jesus. And how is it that you know me? And Jesus answered and said unto him, "Before Philip called thee, when thou was under the fig tree, I saw thee." Sitting under the fig tree, perhaps eating. It was common at that time for people to, the ripe figs and on the trees, to just reach up and pull off some figs and eat. If you've ever ate a raw fig, something other than a fig Newton, it's a very sweet fruit, even from off the tree as it's dried. And so the idea is that he must have been there under the tree, maybe by himself, because as Jesus describes this, Nathanael seems to believe that, one, Jesus wasn't there. He would surely have seen him. And perhaps there wasn't anybody else at all there. And, how could you know me and see me? And so when Jesus tells him that, before Philip came to you, and that may be where Philip found him, it says Philip went seeking or found Nathanael back in verse 45. So he may have literally found him under the fig tree, and it may have just been Philip and Nathanael there by themselves. And so Jesus said, "Before Philip called thee, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." And Nathanael answered and said unto him, "Rabbi, thou art the Son of God, thou art the King of Israel." We again remember, he was prepared, just like many of the other people of John, to look for the Messiah, to look for someone who was going to be very, very powerful, someone who would be the King of Israel. Here he refers to him as the Son of God. He makes several statements about him. We know there's prophecies that Hebrews chapter 1 talks about Jesus, the Old Testament prophecies that speaks of Jesus. "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." And so Nathanael is willing to acknowledge him as being the Messiah, the Son of God, and the King of Israel. He's throwing it all in. Now this is kind of interesting because Philip said, "Come and see." Nathanael wasn't going to buy into it right off just because somebody said it. But when it comes to this understanding, he said he's ready when Jesus tells him that to acknowledge him. And Jesus answered and said unto him, "Because I said unto thee, I saw thee under the fig tree, believest thou? Thou shalt see greater things than these." And so he's being invited as a disciple, later to be an apostle, to see greater things. And as the verse ends, or the chapter ends, it says, "And he said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter you shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." And this seems to have a reference back to Jacob's vision back in Genesis 28, 12 through 22, when he saw what we call Jacob's ladder and heaven open, and angels ascending and descending was part of that vision. And so that it quite literally could have happened. We know that there were angels sent to strengthen Jesus in the garden, and there were interaction with the angels, Jesus and the angels, and prayer. We don't have a specific place, but he says that they would see indeed greater things that would happen in the future. And so he's being invited into this wonderful ministry of Jesus. And we see all this happening through the agency of John the Baptist. And this was able to take place because John had made straight the path. He had made the hearts of the people begin to look back to those promises and the things that they had held to for generations of time. Our time's up this morning. Lord willing, next Lord's Day we will pick up at chapter 2. Thank you for your attention, your comments.